When a routine business flight turns into a career-ending mistake, a flight attendant's worst assumptions collide with a truth that will shake the entire airline industry. Her target? The man who signs her paycheck. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport as Marcus Williams made his way through the bustling terminal. At 42, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing. His tailored charcoal suit and leather briefcase spoke of success, but his warm eyes and easy smile revealed a man who had never forgotten where he came from. Marcus was returning from a successful acquisition meeting in Miami, where his airline company, Skyline Airways, had just purchased a smaller regional carrier. The deal would create thousands of jobs and expand service to underserved communities across the Southeast. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Marcus had dreamed of when he started Skyline Airways 15 years earlier with a single leased aircraft and an unshakable belief that air travel should be accessible to everyone. As the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing airlines in the country, Marcus could have taken his private jet home to Chicago, but he made it a point to fly commercial on his own airline at least once a month, always in economy class, always under a pseudonym. It was his way of staying connected to the customer experience and ensuring that his company's standards were being maintained at every level. Today, however, his assistant had mistakenly booked him in first class under his real name. Marcus didn't mind. It would give him a different perspective on the premium service experience. He approached Gate B-17, where Skyline Airways Flight 447 to Chicago was already boarding. The gate area was filled with the usual mix of business travelers and family. Marcus noticed several Skyline employees moving efficiently through their pre-flight duties, and he felt a familiar sense of pride watching his team in action. He had built this company with a focus on treating both employees and passengers with dignity and respect, values that had been shaped by his own experiences growing up in Chicago's South Side. Flight 437 was one of Skyline's newer Boeing 737s, part of a fleet expansion that had made the airline a major player in domestic travel. As Marcus approached the boarding area, he observed the check-in process, noting how his ground crew interacted with passengers. Everything appeared to be running smoothly. When his boarding group was called, Marcus joined the line of first-class passengers. He handed his boarding pass to Janet Morrison, a gate agent he didn't recognize, likely a new hire or someone from the Miami hub. Janet scanned his ticket without looking up, her movements mechanical and efficient. "Thank you, Mr. Williams," she said automatically, still focused on her computer screen. "Enjoy your flight." Marcus smiled and headed down the jet bridge, impressed by the professional efficiency even if the interaction lacked warmth. He made a mental note to review customer service training protocols, not out of criticism but as part of his constant drive for improvement. The aircraft's interior gleamed under the LED lighting, another upgrade Marcus had personally approved. The first-class cabin featured 12 seats in a 2-2 configuration, upholstered in the deep blue leather that had become Skyline Airways' signature design element. Marcus found his seat, 3A, a window seat that would give him a good view of the takeoff and the chance to review some documents during the flight. As he settled in, Marcus pulled out his tablet and began reviewing the quarterly passenger satisfaction report. The numbers were strong. Skyline consistently ranked in the top 3 for customer service among domestic carriers, but Marcus knew that statistics only told part of the story. The real measure of his company's success was in moments like these, in the thousands of individual interactions between his employees and passengers every single day. The first-class cabin began to fill with other passengers, a few business travelers typing on laptops, a well-dressed elderly couple discussing their vacation plans, and a woman in an expensive suit who spent the entire boarding process on a phone call about stock options. Marcus observed them all with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years studying customer behavior and preferences. That's when she walked onto the aircraft. Brenda Patterson had been a flight attendant for 12 years, but only 8 months with Skyline Airways. At 34, she carried herself with the brisk efficiency of someone who had seen it all and wasn't impressed by much. Her previous airline had gone through a messy bankruptcy, and she'd been lucky to land the position with Skyline, though she often felt like the company's emphasis on passenger experience was just corporate nonsense that made her job more difficult. Brenda had grown up in an affluent suburb of Miami, the daughter of a successful real estate developer. Her worldview had been shaped by private schools and country club memberships, environments where people who looked like Marcus Williams were more likely to be serving drinks than drinking them. Although she would never admit it openly, Brenda harbored deep-seated assumptions about who belonged in first class and who didn't. As she began her pre-flight routine, checking overhead bins and ensuring passenger compliance with safety regulations, Brenda's eyes fell on Marcus in seat. Something about his presence immediately irritated her. He was too relaxed, too comfortable, too much at ease in what she considered to be her domain. "Excuse me," Brenda said, stopping beside Marcus's seat. Her tone was sharp enough to cut through the ambient cabin noise. "I need to see your boarding pass." Marcus looked up from his tablet, surprised by the abrupt demand. Other passengers in first class had not been asked to produce their boarding passes after settling in. "Of course," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Is there a problem?" "I just need to verify that you're in the correct seat," Brenda replied, her voice carrying an edge that several nearby passengers couldn't help but notice. Marcus handed over his boarding pass with a slight frown. He had been through enough airport security and check-in procedures to know that additional verification at this point was unusual. Brenda examined the pass with exaggerated scrutiny, holding it closer to the light as if searching for signs of forgery. "Marcus Williams, seat 3A, she read aloud, her voice dripping with skepticism. "And you're sure this is your ticket?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt the familiar knot in his stomach that came with these kinds of encounters, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times throughout his life when his presence in certain spaces was questioned simply because of the color of his skin. "Yes, I'm quite sure," Marcus replied evenly, his years of business negotiations having taught him the value of maintaining composure under pressure. "Is there some issue with my seat assignment?" Brenda's lips pursed into a thin line. She glanced around the first-class cabin as if looking for support from other passengers, several of whom were now watching the interaction with uncomfortable fascination. The elderly couple had stopped their conversation, and the woman with the phone had ended her call to observe the developing situation. "Look," Brenda said, lowering her voice but not her condescending tone, "I don't know how you got this boarding pass, but I highly doubt you paid for a first-class ticket. Why don't you make this easy for everyone and move back to economy where you belong? I'm sure we can find you a seat back there." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they were unexpected, he had faced this kind of treatment before, but because they represented everything he had worked to eliminate from his company's culture. This was happening on his own airline to him, by one of his own employees. Several passengers gasped audibly. The businessman across the aisle looked up from his laptop with shock written across his face. A young woman in seat 2C pulled out her phone, sensing that something significant was happening. Marcus took a deep breath, drawing on decades of experience dealing with discrimination and prejudice. He had learned long ago that responding with anger, no matter how justified, rarely led to productive outcomes. Instead, he maintained his calm demeanor even as his mind raced through the implications of what was happening. "I can assure you that my ticket is legitimate," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the cabin. "I paid for this seat, and I intend to remain here for the duration of the flight." Brenda's face flushed with irritation. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she had already dismissed as unworthy of first-class treatment. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to voluntarily move to economy class. If you don't comply, I'll have to call security." The threat sent a ripple of discomfort through the cabin. Other passengers began shifting in their seats, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly escalating into a serious incident. The elderly gentleman in seat 1D cleared his throat and spoke up. "Excuse me, miss, but I saw this gentleman board with the first-class passengers. His seat assignment appears to be valid." Brenda whirled around to face the older man, her professional facade cracking. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but crew members are trained to identify passengers who don't belong in premium cabins. This is a security issue." Marcus remained silent for a moment, processing the situation. Part of him wanted to reveal his identity immediately and put an end to the humiliation. But another part, the part that had driven him to build his airline empire, wanted to see how far this would go, to understand exactly what his passengers experienced when they faced discrimination from his employees. "What exactly makes you think I don't belong here?" Marcus asked, his tone remaining conversational despite the gravity of the situation. Brenda's answer came too quickly, revealing the prejudices she had been trying to mask. "Let's just say that people in first class usually have a certain profile, a certain look, and frankly, you don't fit that profile." The cabin fell silent, except for the ambient noise of the aircraft systems. Even the most oblivious passengers now understood what was happening. The young woman in 2C was now openly recording the interaction. Her phone held steady as she captured every word. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the full weight of Brenda's statement. In that moment, he wasn't just Marcus Williams, successful CEO and entrepreneur. He was every black passenger who had ever been questioned, every person of color who had ever been made to feel unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy. But Marcus was also someone with the power to do something about it. "I see," he said calmly, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Perhaps this will clarify things for you." What happened next would become the subject of news reports, social media discussions, and corporate training seminars for years to come. Marcus pulled out a sleek business card holder and extracted a single card, which he handed to Brenda with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the encounter. Brenda took the card dismissively, barely glancing at it before her expression began to change. The card was simple but elegant. "Marcus Williams, Chief Executive Officer, Skyline Airways." Brenda's face went through a remarkable transformation as the implications hit her. The color drained from her cheeks, her eyes widened in shock, and her hands began to tremble slightly as she reread the card to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. This can't be," she stammered, looking from the card to Marcus and back again. Marcus remained seated, his expression neutral but his eyes alert as he watched his employee process the revelation. Around them, other passengers leaned forward, sensing that something significant was happening even if they couldn't see the business card. "Is there still a problem with my seat assignment?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there before, or rather, an authority that Brenda was only now able to perceive. Brenda's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. Her training had never prepared her for this scenario, discovering that she had just discriminated against the person who owned the airline. The weight of her actions was becoming clearer with each passing second, but instead of apologizing or backing down, Brenda's shock began to transform into defensive anger. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was an inability to admit such a fundamental error. Or perhaps it was the same prejudice that had started this confrontation in the first place. "I don't care who you claim to be," she said, her voice rising despite her obvious uncertainty. "You could have had this card made anywhere. Security protocols exist for a reason, and I'm following them." The businessman across the aisle couldn't contain himself any longer. "Ma'am, I fly Skyline regularly, and I've seen Mr. Williams in business magazines. That's definitely him." Another passenger chimed in. "I saw him on CNBC last month talking about the company's expansion plans." But Brenda was too far down the path to turn back now. Her initial mistake had cascaded into a series of increasingly poor decisions, each one making her position more untenable. "Anyone can claim to be anyone," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'm calling the captain." Marcus watched this unfold with a mixture of sadness and professional interest. As a CEO, he understood that this moment would become a case study in crisis management and employee training. As a black man, he was experiencing the familiar frustration of having his credibility questioned, despite providing clear evidence of his identity. "That's probably a good idea," Marcus said calmly. "Please do call Captain Rodriguez. Tell him Marcus Williams would like to speak with him." The use of the captain's name, information that wouldn't have been available to a random passenger, gave Brenda another moment of doubt. But she had committed to her course of action, and she picked up the internal phone to contact the cockpit. As Brenda spoke in hushed tones to the flight deck, Marcus pulled out his cell phone and made a call of his own. The cabin was quiet enough that nearby passengers could hear his side of the conversation. "Sarah, it's Marcus. I need you to conference me in with the Chief of Flight Operations." "Yes, I'm on Flight 44. We have a situation developing that needs immediate attention." The passengers around Marcus began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. The young woman recording the incident had attracted the attention of other passengers, and several people were now discreetly capturing the unfolding drama. Within minutes, Captain Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit, his expression serious, as he made his way down the aisle toward first class. Roberto Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation and had been flying for Skyline Airways since its third year of operation. He had met Marcus on several occasions and held tremendous respect for his boss's vision and leadership. As soon as Captain Rodriguez saw Marcus, his face broke into a smile of recognition, followed immediately by confusion as he took in the tense atmosphere of the cabin. "Mr. Williams," he said warmly, extending his hand. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't realize you were on my flight today." The greeting sent a shockwave through the first-class cabin. Brenda's face went white as the reality of her situation became undeniable. Other passengers began murmuring among themselves, and the sound of camera phones being activated became audible throughout the cabin. Marcus stood and shook the captain's hand. "Hello, Roberto. Unfortunately, this isn't entirely a social visit. We've had a significant service issue that I think you should be aware of." Captain Rodriguez's expression grew serious as he looked from Marcus to Brenda, who was now standing frozen beside seat 3A, still holding Marcus's business card with shaking hands. "What kind of service issue?" the captain asked. Though the tension in the cabin made it clear that whatever had happened was serious, Marcus gestured to Brenda. "Ms. Patterson here has spent the last 10 minutes insisting that I don't belong in first class and demanding that I move to economy. She questioned the validity of my boarding pass, suggested that I had somehow obtained it fraudulently, and made it clear that she believes people who look like me don't have the profile for premium seating." Captain Rodriguez's jaw tightened as he processed this information. He had worked hard to create a positive crew culture, and discrimination of any kind was absolutely contrary to everything Skyline Airways stood for. "Is this true?" he asked Brenda directly. Brenda's response was barely audible. I was following security protocols. I thought." "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Captain Rodriguez pressed. "You didn't know that racial profiling is against company policy. You didn't know that all passengers who board the aircraft have been cleared by security. You didn't know that questioning someone's right to be here based on their appearance is discrimination." The captain's questions hung in the air as Brenda struggled to find an answer that would justify her actions. Meanwhile, Marcus observed the interaction with the analytical mind that had made him successful in business. This was a teaching moment, not just for Brenda but for everyone watching. "Captain Rodriguez," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension, "I think this situation demonstrates some training needs that we should address company-wide. But right now, we have a plane full of passengers who are waiting to depart." The captain nodded, appreciating Marcus's focus on the broader implications rather than personal vindication. "You're absolutely right. Ms. Patterson, please return to your duties. We'll be having a detailed conversation after this flight." As Captain Rodriguez returned to the cockpit and the pre-flight routine resumed, Marcus settled back into his seat, aware that every eye in the first-class cabin was on him. The elderly gentleman across the aisle leaned over. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," he said quietly. "It was completely unacceptable." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. Unfortunately, it's not as uncommon as you might think. But this incident was far from over." As the plane pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway, Marcus was already planning his response. This wasn't just about one employee's poor judgment, it was about systemic issues that needed to be addressed at every level of his organization. During the flight, Brenda performed her duties with mechanical efficiency, avoiding eye contact with Marcus and speaking only when absolutely necessary to passengers. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained tense, with other passengers occasionally glancing between Marcus and Brenda as if waiting for the next development in an ongoing drama. Marcus spent the flight time making notes on his tablet, documenting every detail of the encounter while it was fresh in his memory. He also began drafting what would become a company-wide memo on discrimination, customer service, and the values that Skyline Airways would no longer simply aspire to but would actively enforce. As Flight 477 approached Chicago, Marcus made another phone call, this time to his Chief Human Resources Officer. The conversation was brief but decisive. There would be a full investigation, immediate retraining protocols implemented, and clear consequences for discriminatory behavior. When the plane landed at O'Hare International Airport, Marcus remained seated as other passengers deplaned, most of them offering him supportive words or apologetic glances. The young woman who had recorded the incident approached him before leaving. "Miss Williams, I posted that video on social media. I hope that's okay. People need to see what happened." Marcus considered this for a moment. "I appreciate you documenting it. Transparency is important, but I hope people will see this as an opportunity for improvement, not just criticism." After the passengers had deplaned, Captain Rodriguez returned to speak with Marcus privately. "Sir, I want to apologize personally for what happened. Ms. Patterson's behavior doesn't represent the values of this crew or this airline." "I know it doesn't, Roberto," Marcus replied, "but it represents something we need to address. This isn't about one employee, it's about ensuring that our company culture is strong enough to prevent these situations from occurring." The conversation with Brenda took place in the airport's crew facilities, with Captain Rodriguez, a union representative, and HR personnel present via conference call. Brenda sat across from Marcus, her earlier defiance replaced by obvious distress as the magnitude of her actions became clear. "Ms. Patterson," Marcus began, his tone professional but not unkind, "I want you to help me understand your thought process today. What made you believe I didn't belong in first class?" Brenda struggled to answer. I don't know. It seemed suspicious." "What seemed suspicious?" "The fact that I was reading quietly on my tablet, the fact that I was well-dressed and professional. Help me understand what specifically raised red flags for you." The silence that followed was telling. Brenda couldn't articulate a reason because there hadn't been one beyond her own biases and assumptions. Marcus continued. "I've been in situations like this before, Ms. Patterson. I've been followed in stores, questioned at hotels, and asked to prove that I belong in spaces where my presence is assumed to be inappropriate. The difference today is that this happened on my own airline, by my own employee, to me as your CEO, but more importantly, it happened to me as a passenger who deserved the same respect as everyone else on that aircraft." The investigation was swift and decisive. Brenda's employment with Skyline Airways was terminated for discrimination and failure to acknowledge her actions. Marcus's response went beyond discipline. Within days, Skyline Airways announced comprehensive bias training for all employees and new discrimination reporting protocol. The passenger's video went viral within hours. Instead of damage control, Marcus chose transparency, releasing a public statement taking full responsibility and outlining concrete steps for change. 6 months later, Marcus received a letter from a young black woman entering flight training. "Seeing how you handled that situation with dignity inspired me to believe the airline industry can be a place where people like me belong." The incident became a turning point for the entire industry. Other airlines began examining their policies, and Skyline's standard became synonymous with equal treatment for all passengers. A year later, Skyline Airways was recognized as the most inclusive airline in North America with record customer satisfaction and stock prices at an all-time high. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Change happens when we refuse to accept discrimination as inevitable and instead demand better from ourselves and the institutions we support. Subscribe to Black Story Life for more stories that challenge us to examine our assumptions and work toward a more just society. Because sometimes, the most powerful moments come when someone finally sees us for who we truly are, not who they assumed us to be.